right, so Jake, I read that you were like a lot of young broadcasters. You were calling Nintendo 64 games as a kid. And I got to ask, you're playing Madden, you're playing with your brother or your friends, and you're calling the game. Are they okay with you calling it?
I don't know if they had a choice, right? So too bad. Because it was at our house, right? If we're the friends, our house was like the social hub in high school and early high school of our friend group, and we'd have like NCAA football kind of tournaments, the winter stays, right? So they didn't have a choice. But I think honestly, it was probably more on my own when I'm playing the computer, the CPU, right, as it was known. Three letters I only know from playing video games as a child, where I would call the games, yeah.
One of the interesting things, Jake, about your career, as we're going to get into it, is when I have people on this podcast, I always like to ask about, the sport they kind of ended up covering as a writer or broadcaster. And like oftentimes it kind of is accidental. I always tell people, like, for me, NFL was accidental. You are very fortunate that soccer was something that you loved early on.
Yeah.
I mean, I read you got right in the Chicago Fire when they started in the late 90s. What did you love about soccer as a kid?
It was my favorite sport. I think just because I was the best at it, and that isn't saying anything. I mean, that's a very relative comment, right? I was not a good athlete, and I played all the sports growing up. I played Little League, and you played basketball for your elementary school, played with friends, played flag football, played AYSO soccer. And I was, I'm that generation. I'm 40, where you grew up and you played AYSO. It was part of it, especially in Evanston, which is a great soccer town in Chicago. The Chicagoland area is a great soccer metropolitan area. And so it was my favorite of the sports, but I was a huge basketball, football, baseball guy. I loved the Cubs, the Bears, and the Bulls. And when it came time for the MLS to come about well, first of all, the World Cup in '94 was fantastic. I was 8, 9, then MLS. I'm 10, 11 in the first year of MLS, and my 10-year-old brain couldn't understand why Chicago didn't have a team of the 10 teams. And I was disappointed, but I still watched the league because it's the league in our country. And then 2 years later, the Chicago Fire, an expansion team in the third year of MLS. And for me, there was never a thought of not being a Fire fan, because soccer was my favorite sport, or at least one of my favorite sports, right? It was on the same level for me as basketball and football and baseball were. And thus the Fire were going to be on the same level as the Cubs, the Bears, and the Bulls. They're Chicago's team. So I was a diehard Fire fan growing up. I remember where I was for their first ever game, which was on the road in Miami, I believe. I remember being at the Western Conference Final in 1998 at Soldier Field when they beat the Galaxy to make it to MLS Cup. They would win that MLS Cup. And so, yeah, I think it was just about soccer being my favorite sport, and then channeling that into fandom of the Fire, just as I channeled my love of basketball, baseball, and football into the Cubs, the Bears, and the Bulls. It was no different for me growing up. And as time went on, I got more into, kind of soccer can be, especially then it was a niche, right? And it can be it is very communal in a good way. And so I think I developed a lot of pride in MLS, right? And like being a fan of an American soccer team and an American soccer league, and really wanting it to succeed for personal fan reasons. And then over time, fortunate enough to be working in it, and that transitioning to being professional reasons. And I'm still working in it today. So yeah, this is, you kind of said it, as far as ending up in the sport you're covering. If you had talked to me at 20 years old, I would have described my current job as my dream job. And I'm so fortunate to be doing it now, and to be calling MLS games. And it's just always been my passion. And look, if my career went and I ended up in baseball or basketball or football, that would be fantastic too. There'd be a lot more competition in those sports. But it's worked out well for me, and it's what I've wanted to do.
Your first broadcasts, well, outside Nintendo 64, were at your high school, Evanston
Yes.
High School. I read you got cut from your soccer team, and you started calling high school games with your brother.
Yes.
On local access. So how does that come about? How do you make that work?
really fortunate to go to a high school with incredible resources. Evanston Township High School in Evanston, Illinois, public school, 3,500 kids. Anything you wanted to do, you could do in the trades, academically, whatever. And that included that we had a local public access television station in the school, WKIT TV, WKIT TV. We were the Wild Kits, Wildcats Northwestern. We're the high school there. We're the Wild Kits. And so WKIT TV produced student broadcasts of games, and that it was just one camera and two headsets plugged into the camera. You'd sit in front of the camera, you'd call the game, there was somebody shooting it. They'd take the tape out of the camera when the game was over, run it back to the station, pop it in, and it would play on tape delay for all of the parents and players who got home from the game. They would watch. I don't know who else was watching other than the people who just played in that game and were there in person watching it, and then they get home and they get to watch it again. And I think it was my junior year when a senior that I knew, a guy named Bernard Rocca, who I was on the math team with. He was an athlete. He was on the soccer team, and his older brother was one of the best athletes in Evanston history, a guy named Mason, who ended up playing on the Italian national basketball team. But Bernard would play on the soccer team in the fall, and then he was calling games like basketball and then girls soccer, which was in the spring. And I knew Bernard through math team, and we took some math classes together. I was a big math nerd as well in high school. I think he must have needed someone to call the girls' high school games with, and he asked me if I wanted to do it. I think he knew I was into sports, and maybe I'd said something about it. And so those were the first games I think that I called for my junior year. Maybe we did some basketball, but that I remember, junior year, Evanston Township High School, girls soccer. They won the state championship. They were undefeated, an incredible team, finished ranked second in the country. Actually, a team that featured a starter, Cassidy Hubbarth, who is longtime ESPN, now sideline reporter for Amazon Prime, NBA and Amazon Prime, who was my year at Evanston. And they were a great team. So I called those games with Bernard. He graduated, and then my senior year, I was kind of the incumbent. And I have a twin brother named Sam. And so I got Sam to come call games with me. And we started with soccer in the fall. And both Sam and I played soccer and got cut. But many of our best friends did not get cut. We're actually good at playing sports and we're on the team, including, you mentioned Eli Cabron, his older brother Ben was on that team, was my best friend in high school. So we were just loving it and having a good time. That was also a very good soccer team. They made it to the state championship game. They lost in the state championship game, but it was a big deal back then. Now soccer is totally different. If you're good, you play for an academy. Every good soccer player in Chicago is playing for the Chicago Fire Academy. Really good player, right? Is playing for the Chicago Fire Academy or another big club. But in 2002, that wasn't the case. Everybody, even the best players, played for their high schools. So it was a big deal to get to the state championship game. They lost that game, but I remember it well. We did basketball together. We haven't had a great basketball team that year too. Man, I'm reminiscing about this is I can still remember these games and how much fun they were. The basketball team finished fourth in state my senior year. Their starting five were like all D1. I'm name dropping big time, but also in my class at Evanston, Austin Brown was on the basketball team, who's now runs CAA's basketball division and is like rumored to take over as president of basketball operations for every NBA job that gets open. He's one of the most powerful agents in the NBA. Austin came off the bench, was a great player, 3-point shooter. And we had a great team. Lost to Sean Livingston's Peoria Central team in the state semifinals and the Final Four, and then lost to John Shire's Glenbrook North team in the third place game, which a third place game is like nobody wants to be in the third place game, right? So Evanston's just trying to dunk every time down the court. Glenbrook North is just bombing threes, and 3 beats 2. So John Shire probably dropped 50 in that game as like a sophomore or a freshman. But it was great times, and we got to call all of those games. Evanston New Trier games at Welsh Ryan Arena, sold out Welsh Ryan Arena, right, which is Northwestern's basketball arena for these high school games. Great rivalry. It was fantastic. So that's how I started, and it was as fun as I thought it would be. When you're shooting hoops in your driveway and you're pretending to call, the game that you're pretending to play, it's fun. And then you actually get to do it, and it was still fun. And so I thought, hey, I want to keep doing this as long as I can.
So you went to Carleton for
Yeah.
college,
Yeah.
and what is, 'cause I like to think we have a lot of young people listening. What was the benefit for you, I think, in your career to go somewhere like Carleton, where you did a lot of broadcasting, as opposed to, one of the big name J schools?
Yeah, I would say this. I did not know the best path to take to be a broadcaster. I didn't even really think about it. I just kind of figured you go to whatever college you go to and you try to call the games if you want to call the games because someone's calling the games. And it didn't cross my mind. I should have probably done more research into it to apply to a Syracuse, to try to go to Newhouse or Missouri or a Northwestern across the street from my Medill's an incredible school. I took math classes at Northwestern my senior year, so I probably could have got in. And I didn't think about it. I wanted to go to a small liberal arts school. My dad went to a liberal arts school, and it just felt like at the time, as an 18-year-old, that just would kind of fit me the best socially. And my plan was I'm going to go to a school. I applied to all the New England liberal arts schools, and I after getting into where I got in and checking out the schools, I liked Carleton the best. I thought, all right, I'm going to go to Carleton. I'm going to major in math because I was I was a math nerd, and I'm going to try to call games. And now I realize that's maybe not the best path, but it worked for me. And I think it shows that you get out of everything what you put into it. And going to Carleton, a school that is not a sports school, it is proudly a nerd school. I say that as one. It meant that there wasn't competition. I emailed the athletic director my first week or two at Carleton, and I said, "Hey, I want to call games. What can I? Can I?" And he put me in touch with the sports information director, and they said, "Yeah, here, of course." And it was actually a campus job. I got paid to do it. The student rate, just the same as everyone is working in the dorms or working in the cafeterias or working in the labs. I got paid to call the games, and I'd put together the game notes beforehand in the sports information department. I'd write the game recap for the website afterwards. It was all streaming audio. It wasn't even on the student radio station at Carleton because that student radio station was completely full with student radio shows. If you wanted a radio show, you were guaranteed one. And whoever asked for one, they would just divvy up all the hours in the week. And there'd be like a lottery system based on seniority. You pick your time slot. But those were so coveted at KRLX, the radio station, that there was no time to preempt anybody's precious slot for the basketball game that started on Wednesday at 8 o'clock. So it was streaming audio. And this was in 2003, which was actually pretty early for that. And it was a good thing because it meant we could call every sport. So I called soccer, I called basketball, a little volleyball, baseball, and softball. There was one other a friend of mine at Carleton, one other student who wanted to do broadcasting. His name is Adam Rossau. He's actually a reporter now at Spectrum in Dallas, Texas. He's still doing it, which is great. And it was us two for 4 years that pretty much called every game. He was on the football team and later the baseball team. So he didn't do as much in the fall, but we would do basketball together and we'd kind of trade off who's play-by-play, who's color. And because we went to a school where there's not a formal education in broadcasting or journalism, and there's just generally not a huge enthusiasm for sports, it allowed us to call every game for 4 years and get so many reps and hone a skill that maybe we didn't even know we were honing, but do so in a way that in retrospectively, I think was really important for me to be ready to enter the professional world of broadcasting without the Newhouse education, without a degree in it.
Your internship, I read, you were in the MLS truck,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
broadcast truck, which, I mean, we could talk about this at the end. What a cool full circle for you. But I want to know how you got the internship and then what exactly you did.
So I just applied. It was in between sophomore and junior year. And I applied to a bunch of internships in sports for different teams and for TV stations in Chicago, where I was from, and anything where I could find information about their internship program online. I was a huge soccer guy, as I said, and a huge MLS person. And MLS had a pretty robust internship program at the time just for the summer. Now I think it's year round, so it's more for post grad. But back then it was 2-month summer internship. And I sent in a letter and a cover letter and a resume. And I got a call back from a guy named Jason Sagini, who's now the VP of broadcasting at MLS still. 20 years later, we worked together. And, we had an interview and they offered me the internship. I was also offered an internship at I guess it was called Comcast Sportsnet Chicago at the time. I think that was the name of it back then. It would eventually become NBC Sports Chicago. And I that was a tough decision. And ultimately, I went with the MLS internship because I loved soccer. I loved MLS, and I felt like I might be able to do more because this is 2005, and it was a very different league. It was the 9th or 10th season of the league. It was a smaller operation, and I knew that if I was there in New York City in the league office, I could actually do stuff, right? I wasn't just getting people coffee and watching. I could do things. And it ended up being a great decision. It worked out. So I went to New York for the summer. I lived in the dorms at NYU and would go to the league headquarters 4 days a week and there was a 4-person broadcast department, and then me as the intern. I was mostly doing tape to tape editing for teams that would request video. This is a pre-digital media era. So every MLS game, when it was complete, when the truck finished up in the local broadcast, they would put together what's called a melt. This is standard in television. A melt, which is essentially a long-form highlight reel of the game with multiple angles from every important play. It's maybe 20, 25 minutes long. And the tape room puts that together throughout the game. And then when the game ends, you'd have to put that melt onto a physical tape, take 20, 25 minutes, and then overnight it to the MLS headquarters that kept basically a tape archive of every MLS game ever. And so then when a team needed video, say Tony Meola was retiring and Kansas City needed to put together a tribute video for their video board, they would put a request into the league office, and the intern, me, would go through all these tapes of Tony Meola's career and tape to tape edit onto a new tape, 10 minutes of Tony Meola footage. I wasn't putting together a highlight reel for air. I was just compiling the video for then the club to put something fancy together. And I'd send it on. So I did that. I learned a lot about kind of that side of things. And maybe a month into the internship, my boss, who I was interning for, a guy named Larry Tiscornia, who was with the league for a long time as well and is now with NEP Vista, who was someone who's very instrumental in my career the whole time. Larry asked me, hey, the bug op, so the clock and score operator is the official name of this role. When you're watching a game on TV, you see the scoreboard on TV with all sorts of information. That is called the bug in TV parlance. So the bug op for the MLS game of the week got another job. We need one. Do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, sure, of course. What does it entail? And it entailed flying to the game of the week every week, sitting in the truck. I had a little, it was basically a hard drive that plugged into a laptop. It was bigger than that because this was 2005. And it would run the software plugged into the truck. And I'm in the back row of kind of the front room of the truck, 2 or 3 rows behind the producer and the director. And I'm controlling the bug, which in soccer was very important back then also, and still, because there's no commercials during a soccer game, but every 5 minutes, the sponsor next to the score is changed, and I had to change it every 5 minutes. I had to be right on. And that's the most important part of the show, right? No. And it was a dream. I mean, I did it for 2 seasons. While I was still in college, my junior and senior year, essentially, I would drive from Carleton College, which is in Northfield, Minnesota, about 45 minutes north to MSP, to Minneapolis St. Paul Airport. I'd get on a Northwest Airlines flight, and I'd fly to wherever the game is, do the game on Saturday, get back, fly back to Minneapolis on Sunday, drive back down to Carleton. And I lost a lot of Friday and Saturday nights in college that most people were out socializing, but I was living this dream. I was, every Friday night having dinner with Rob Stone was doing play-by-play. Eric Winalda, who I grew up watching, was the color commentator. Brandy Chastain, an absolute legend in world sports was our sideline reporter, our producer, Mitch Green, our director, Mike Sheen, everybody. And they were so great to me. The 20-year-old kid with no experience just coming on the road in the truck. And I'm having dinner with them Friday night. I'm working with them Saturday. I'm learning so much about TV. It was just this kind of whirlwind of a dream for 2 years. And it did, to your point, eventually lead back to me getting back into soccer. It was important. Without that, I don't think I'd be where I am now.
First job, you go to Montana. How did you get that job?
I applied to 40 or 50 small market TV stations. That's what you had to do. I graduated college in 2007. There were not, it's so different now, right? There were not entry level. They're the only entry level play-by-play jobs. And I always knew I wanted to do play-by-play preferably, but the entry level play-by-play jobs were typically short season minor league baseball jobs, which were not full-time in the sense of full year round. Not, you didn't get benefits. Also, Carleton was on the trimester system, which meant we graduated a week or two into June. Well, all of those minor league play-by-play baseball jobs were full because even the short season teams, started in May. So they weren't even open for me to apply to by the time I could apply to them. What I could apply to were local TV sports reporter jobs. And so that's what I did. And I didn't know, again, I went to a school where, as you mentioned, Carleton, there was no journalism program. I had no guidance on how to even look for jobs. I was able to put together a resume tape, and I stumbled upon a website called tvjobs.com. I don't know if it still exists. It sounds like a scam, but it was not. It was essentially an online job board for local news. And every local news station, when they had an opening, they would send it to tvjobs.com. And it would get posted there. And you had to subscribe. It was, I don't know, $10 a month. It was worth it if you're job seeking. And every day I would open it up, and all of the small market entry level sports jobs. I'm not sending my tape to Philadelphia, but every entry level small market job, I would quickly write up a cover letter, or I would, edit the template of the cover letter that I had, print it out on nice paper, print out my resume on nice paper, good cardstock, and take a DVD to FedEx and overnight the resume, the cardstock, and the physical DVD to the station. Again, it's 2007. YouTube doesn't exist. I can't just send a link to my tape via email. And I did it for a couple months, and I finally got a call from the KTVM in Butte, Bozeman, Montana, from a sports director there who was a soccer guy from LA, big Galaxy fan, so he loved that I had MLS on my resume. He was a year older than me. Guy named Jeff Friedman, one of my best friends still to this day. And we talked, and he interviewed me. I'm sure he interviewed a lot of other people, and they offered me the job. And back then, I was not going to be picky. I was going to take the first job offered. If somebody wanted to pay me to talk about sports on television, I was taking the job. Doesn't matter how much. They weren't paying me much, $17,500 a year. But there was never a doubt in my mind that I was going to go for it. And that's how I got my first job, and out to Butte, Montana, as a 22-year-old. I went, knowing nobody in the entire state.
All right, so what does $17,500 get them? What were some of your what was your day-to-day like in that first
Not
job?
a lot. Well, I will say the cost of living in Butte was low,
Right.
so that was nice. I could survive on it. It was wild, man. I loved it. I loved my time in Montana. I feel so lucky that is where my first job in my career path took me. I was a sports and news reporter at the Butte Bureau for the Bozeman station. Now everybody knows Bozeman, Montana. I mean, Bozeman is hot, right? Butte is about an hour west of Bozeman. It's a fascinating town. It's an old mining town. 100 years ago, it was a boom town. It was one of the most important cities in the West. The majority of the copper in America at that time came from the Butte Anaconda area, the mines in Butte. And there were, it was the worldly city. There were people from all over the world, immigrants that came to work in the mines, and the remnants of that are still there today. But the population is probably a quarter now of what it was 100 years ago, literally, right? I mean, there were over 100,000 people there in the early 1900s, and that population has diminished as the mines have closed. But the city still has this attitude of being, they call it the richest hill on earth, and Butte America, they call it. And they have this feeling of being this ultra important big city. And I loved it. I loved the people there. There weren't a lot of people like me, right? Of recent college graduates starting their career in Butte. There weren't a lot of young professionals in Butte, but I was the only person in my TV station in Butte in the bureau. There was a CBS station in Butte that was based there, and they had a few, they had more positions and recent college graduates. One of whom is now my wife, Amanda, who we met in our first jobs, and we were both doing the same thing. We were sports news reporters. She's from Oakland. She went to USC, and she got her first job in Butte for the CBS station. I got mine for the NBC station. And we were just friends for a while, and we had a great friend group, between Butte and Bozeman, where we would all get together and we'd hang out, and it was almost like a second college experience. And I loved those times. That's socially. Professionally, I did everything. I was the only person for my station in Butte. It was hired as mostly a sports job because Butte's a really big sports town, and the station in Bozeman wanted to try to kind of get in with the sports fan in Butte. And so it's covering the local high schools. There was an NAI school there named Montana Tech. Their football coach, by the way, a guy named Bob Green, is a legend. YouTube Bob Green, Montana Tech. He is like the most colorful coach ever. And we would just go to his media availability, and you'd stick a camera in his face, and he would say these ridiculous lines, and you'd put it on the air, and it was TV gold. It made our job easy. But it was all one-man banding. Meaning you're shooting the interviews, you're editing the footage, you're fronting that footage on the air, you're writing, you're doing everything. When there were big news events, I would cover those as well. And there were quite a few. Evel Knievel is from Butte, Montana. He passed away a month into my job there, and his funeral was held in Butte at the Butte Civic Center. And MSNBC wanted footage. So it's NBC Montana were the station group. The NBC stations in Montana. We had one satellite truck. It was in Missoula. So they drove it to Butte, and they had a few of us on cameras in the Civic Center, shooting it live so that MSNBC, because we were an NBC affiliate, could cut to it whenever they wanted, just on their day's coverage. This is Evel Knievel's funeral. Matthew McConaughey gave the eulogy. Joe Frazier was there. It was wild. And I'm like this 22-year-old kid in my first job, and I'm thinking, this is so cool. And telling my parents, hey, watch MSNBC because the shot of Evel Knievel, that's me in the rafters on a camera, right? Like, which happened. It happened. And there was a time in my life where I'm just so excited to be doing this, and then it wasn't glamorous, but it was what I wanted to do. And so I was in Butte for about 9 months, and then headed to Missoula, which was where our stations were based, to be the sports director there. So they after being like the bureau reporter in Butte for 9 months, they brought me there, and then it was all in sports, which is what I wanted to do, and that was nice then to be just like a sports anchor every day. You're just doing sports.
So I don't want to gloss over Eugene, your time there.
Okay.
But I'm going to gloss over it for a second because the show is called Breaking In. We talked about kind of how you broke into TV in Montana, but I want to get in a little bit how you broke into being a play-by-play guy full time. So I want to read this article. This is from the Oregonian, 2015, I believe. Jake Zivin probably could have done his last sportscast for KEZI in Eugene, then, like George Costanza's Seinfeld fame, thrown his hands in the air and exclaimed, "All right, that's it for me," and walked off the set. In many ways, Zivin did leave on a high note when he did his final segment for Eugene's ABC affiliate last week, including a 4-year stint in which he covered an amazing round of sports in the city, the Oregon football team's unprecedented success, including Marcus Mariota's entire college career, record-setting track and field performances at Hayward Field, 2 Ducks basketball NCAA appearances, strong Oregon baseball teams, and many others. It's been an incredible run and an incredible 4 years of sports in Eugene, Zivin said. Zivin, though, is ready for his next challenge, one that will fulfill a career goal he has had since he was in high school, doing play-by-play for his school's soccer and basketball teams. Zivin really buried the lead here, Mike. The writer is very good though. Zivin is joining the Portland Timbers full time. Why don't you kind of tell our listeners about how you became kind of finally got to be play-by-play in the MLS?
Yeah. So this is a lesson in what not to do, I would say, for young people, in that it was it was a culmination of maybe too long to get connected with the Timbers. So I was in Eugene as a sports anchor for about 4.5 years, and my first 3 months there were the fall of 2010, and that year Oregon went to the national title game. The football team, they lost to Auburn. It was the Cam Newton, the Michael James was the big matchup in that game. And being in Eugene, when the Duck football team is good, as they usually are now, you are doing a lot of work for the whole state because from a news perspective, because the Portland news stations want all the Duck content and they're not coming down. They're asking you. And then when Blazer season starts, they trade us down Blazer stuff, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. But the sports director at the Fox station in Portland was a guy named Matt Smith. And we were the ABC station in Eugene, but we shared with Fox because the ABC station in Portland was owned by the same group that owned the CBS in Eugene. This is getting into the weeds of local TV. But that was beneficial because I knew Matt a little bit, and, we would trade video, and we were all in Phoenix for that national title game for a whole week. And so you kind of get to know everybody. When that season ended, Matt left Fox to go be the director of broadcasting for the Timbers. They started in MLS. The first year was in 2011. I didn't say anything to Matt or, make that connection at all. And 3 years later, I'm still in Eugene. I remember this very well. We had every Friday night we did a game of the week, either football or basketball, on what was our .2. It was KZI 9+. It was a very rudimentary broadcast, slightly better than the Evanston Township High School broadcast that I was describing earlier. We had 2 cameras on this broadcast, no replays, none of that. And I remember I was sitting there in Springfield High School in Springfield, Oregon, and it was probably halftime, and I look at my phone, and there's an email from Matt Smith. And the email says, "Hey, Jake, it's been a while, but I'm sitting in the truck next to Larry Tiscornia, a name I mentioned earlier, who was at this time the VP of broadcasting of MLS. This was a Timbers playoff game that night. I think it was maybe their first ever home playoff game. And Larry tells me, you're a soccer guy. We might have some radio openings. Let's talk." And I'm buzzing. I mean, I love MLS, and I would, at any chance I could when I was in local news, I would just throw up a highlight of an MLS game or the MLS Cup or MLS All-Star game, even if it didn't. And we were always hyper local, but I would break that rule for that, just kind of my own personal, for my own personal reasons, because I loved it. And I'm buzzing and I'm excited, and I don't know where it's going to lead. And so, winter comes, off season for the Timbers. I drive up to Portland. I meet with Matt. The only play-by-play professionally, it's hard to even call it professional, were these games of the week. I had a tape of that I brought for him, of me calling Eugene High School basketball and football. I brought my college soccer play-by-play tape to show, I do know soccer. Larry wasn't lying. And then my television resume tape, which is a little more polished at this point, 7 years as a local news sports anchor, to show, okay, I can broadcast. And we had a good chat, and it ended with Matt saying we'd love for you to be our radio play-by-play guy. What it would entail would be basically just 20 games, because when the Timbers were on national TV, the local TV, the Timbers TV commentator would move down to radio. So it was the 20 games that were on local TV of maybe the 34. And we're paying, per game, just total part-time per game thing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do it. No matter what, I'm going to do it. This is my dream. MLS. This is my in, right? Went back to my station in Eugene. The timing worked out great. My contract was about to be up, and we had just there's a 4-person sports department, 3 on air. The other 2 on air had just left within the past 6 months. One of whom, my good friend, Steven Nelson, who's now the radio voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers and TV voice of the Dodgers when Joe Davis isn't there, and formerly of MLB Network, NHL Network. Steven's a star. Steven left for Bleacher Report in no time because he was great. So, but anyway, we had openings, and I think we'd fill the openings, but it was with 2 pretty new people. And this is leading into a season that we knew the Ducks were going to be great. It was Marcus Mariota's junior year, I think. It ended up being his Heisman year, and everybody knew this was going to be a big year for the Ducks. So I basically went to them and I was like, look, we don't want to turn over the whole sports department before this year. I'll stay through the end of the year, sign another, another year contract if you let me do this with the Timbers, because I'm going to do it. And if you say no, I'm going to move to Portland and I'll figure it out. I'll figure out a normal 9-to-5 job and I'm going to call the games. And they were, to be fair to them, Mark Hatfield was the name of our news director. It was no argument. He's like, yeah, great. We'll do it. So I had it in my contract that any Timbers game that they wanted me to call, I could call, including Saturdays in the fall, Duck game days. And there were a few of them that I missed to go call Timbers games. And so I did that for a season, driving up from Eugene. And at the end of that season, the Timbers said, hey, we want to bring you on full time. Their USL team, which is basically the reserve team, was starting that year. They needed somebody to call those games on YouTube. I wasn't only calling their games, I was managing the T2 website and T2 social media. I was calling radio for the first team, and I was hosting our weekly show called Timbers in 30 that aired on the local Fox station, our TV partner. So that brought me up there. And where I'm going with why it's a story of what not to do is I never reached out to Matt Smith, somebody I knew who was in a hiring position for the Portland Timbers for basically my dream job for 3.5 years. I didn't do it because for me, I thought Portland is the big market. I can't. I'm in market 120 in Eugene. Portland's market 22, whatever. I'm not ready for that. If I'm ready for that, they'll call me. Not in a way, an arrogant way, in the other side, in a big imposter syndrome way. And I now realize, and Matt, my boss, who I'm close with, has said to me many times, like, why didn't you email me? What took you? Like, why didn't you do that? It's like, I don't know. I should have. You're right. So that would be my advice to anybody breaking in is give it a go, send that email. The worst thing that happens is nobody writes you back. And if I had sent that email, if I'd sent any email before, maybe it would have happened sooner, but also the timing worked out great. John Strong was their television play-by-play announcer. He's also a good friend of mine. He is now the lead, and has been for a decade, the lead soccer announcer at Fox. We'll call the World Cup final next summer for Fox. If John wasn't as good as he was, the job would have never opened. But John, after 2.5 years, was poached by NBC Sports to be their lead MLS guy. When they got the Premier League and Arlo White went from being their lead MLS to their lead Premier League, they grabbed John to be their lead MLS, which then meant that Keith Blyer, who was doing radio for the Timbers, was elevated to Timbers TV, which then meant the Timbers needed a radio job. So even if I had emailed Matt 2 years before, there may have been nothing there. So it worked out for me, but yeah, again, the advice is just send that email. That's what I would say.
Jake, we'll wrap up with a couple questions I ask every guest. Your welcome to the big leagues moment. I mean, you could take this a lot of different directions. Could have been something in Montana. Could have been when you started on Apple TV as the voice of the MLS. But what was your it could be negative or positive, just like when it's like, oh, I'm here. This is real. This is my professional job.
There's so many. And the first day on air in Butte, Montana would be there. Honestly, the first game I called at Evanston Township High School, I would be there. Certainly first Timbers game, first ESPN game for MLS, first MLS Cup for Apple, Messi's first goal. But I think I'll go back to Montana, and this is not sports, because I was doing news and sports reporting, and this was 2008. It was the election cycle. And Barack Obama is holding a rally at Brick Breeden Fieldhouse in Bozeman, Montana, which was their basketball arena. It's really a rodeo arena that they also played basketball in. And I had been doing a lot of news that summer for various reasons. And me and the sports director, Jeff, who I mentioned earlier, were both having to do news and sports that summer. And we had been in touch with the Obama campaign in Montana a couple times, because he came or a proxy would come. And we every time would be like, hey, can we get an interview with Barack? Can we get an interview with Barack? We're 22. Like, what we're asking, which is what I didn't do with Matt Smith, what I just mentioned. And so Barack Obama's coming for a rally in Bozeman, and we get a call or a text from the campaign manager in Montana saying, hey, he's going to get there early. If you guys can get to this arena in 20 minutes, you can get an interview with him. So we throw everything in the car. We drive through Bozeman as fast as we can. We just park wherever, get out. We get to the arena. We're there in time. Bring us around back. We walk past Michael Keaton, who's there to introduce Barack Obama because he lives in the Paradise Valley, and into this room. And it's just us two sitting in this room and we're waiting. And after, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, in comes Barack, and he looks exhausted because he's on the campaign and he's got his BlackBerry, and it's me, it's our sports director, my good friend, who's going to shoot the interview. He's got the camera. I'm going to do the interview. It's a security or Secret Service. I don't know if it was officially Secret Service protection because this is during the campaign person, and it's his campaign manager. And there's 5 of us in the room. And we do a 5-minute interview. I've got 4 questions. You got 4 questions, 5 minutes. Boom. And I ask him 4 questions. I try to make him about Montana. It's remarkable, from the guy who walks in who he looks exhausted, of course, to just the switch flips and he's on. And this was a huge moment. And he was a rock star then, right? I mean, it was not being political, but it was, those rallies were similar to what we're seeing with Donald Trump's rallies now, where it was a cult of personality. And so this energy was incredible. And to do this interview is quite intimidating with somebody who would become the president of the United States as a 22-year-old. That was certainly my, oh boy, this is real, you just got to do it, right? Figure out what 4 questions you want to ask him and try to make it about Montana and go. But that was pretty cool. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Jake, we'll wrap with this. The through line, the question I always ask is, you think back to go Montana, you talk about Eugene, Timbers Radio, go Carlton, go all the way back to high school. What is the through line to the things that you learned that, we're recording this during the MLS playoffs, you're calling playoff games, you're calling the MLS Cup on Apple TV, those things that you learned that still matter to what you do today?
Man, work hard, first of all. Do good work, be reliable. And I think, if you're asking about a through line that has led me to where I am, I think be a good teammate, I think, is really important. I think in this business, it is obviously a business based on your talent, right? And I don't like that word because in this business, that word is usually used to only refer to people who are on air. But I'm talking about for those of us commentators. Oftentimes you get hired because of how good you are at your job. But I think you get elevated within jobs and you keep jobs based on how you are as a person. And I'd like to think that being easy to work with, being a humble teammate within the shows, is a reason why I've been able to have the little bit of success that I've had in my career. From Montana, where I started as a Butte Bureau reporter, to then being promoted to the regional sports director. From Eugene, where I started as the number 3 in the sports department, as the Oregon State beat reporter, to getting promoted to the Oregon Ducks beat reporter, to then getting promoted to the sports director. From the Timbers, who hired me to do 20 radio games as one-offs, to bringing me on full time, and then a year later making me the TV voice. I like to think that is, look, obviously there's something I'm good enough to do the jobs, right? I feel arrogant saying that, but like they thought that I was. But then I think to get promoted within that job, it's not just because you're good on camera, right? It also has to be, you have to have that, but it also has to be how you're interacting with people within the organization. And so, yeah, I think that would be, I'd like to think, a through line. I've had a lot of people that have helped me that I've known for 20 years, going back to my time as an MLS intern, that have helped me in, 10, 15 years later, and still that I'm working with now, that I worked with 20 years ago when I was running the Bug, and I have a great relationship with all of them. And I like to think that's because of my attitude and their attitude, right? I mean, it goes both ways. And I think the people that succeed, yes, they have ability, but also I'm really a believer in being a good person and being a good teammate off the air, off camera, will take you a long way.
Well, Jake, this has been great. I loved, obviously, the Evanston and Northwestern and Chicago shout outs. It's
Yeah,
again
we're really granular there
down in the
with some of
weeds.
some of the references. Yeah.
But it's again so awesome to talk to you and learn about how you were on the early Chicago Fire, and here you are for Apple TV calling the MLS, and you are the first soccer sports media personality to appear on this podcast. So you have that honor that you can now throw on the resume. So thanks for coming on and telling the listeners how you broke in.
I'm very honored, and thanks for having me. It's going straight to the top of the resume, #1 on there for sure. No, thanks, Kevin. This is fun.